Hey, what's going on, good people? Welcome to Russ Can Fly. Are you an anxious student pilot? Listen, I can help.
Oh my goodness, Russ can fly.
Okay, so let's get right into it. I got 3 things that I want to suggest to help lower your anxiety level if you find yourself being an anxious student pilot. Now, let me say this before I jump into these 3 things that I think can be good tools for you to use to lower your anxiety. First, I want to say to anybody who does suffer from any type of anxiety when they're going to get into a plane, especially if you're a student pilot, give yourself some grace. Everyone who's been part of this journey shares your same concern, your same issues. We've all been there. Starting your student pilot journey is really tough. There's a lot to think about. There's, of course, the financial aspect, which is a given, but it's all of the learning. This is a whole new thing that you're about to begin. And so anybody who's normal should feel some level of anxiety. Here's the thing. Like I said, give yourself some grace. Now, I don't mean to be too flip, but seriously, I've seen people who are like, I'm not anxious at all. Nothing about this bothers me. I'm used to doing this, blah, 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 blah. That's great. But there should be some level of, respect for this whole thing because, it takes a lot of learning. There's a lot that goes into it. There's all kinds of safety factors. And so, like I said, if you feel some level of anxiousness, which I did, the movement, the height, just all the stuff that there was to learn, it was a little bit of anxiety producing for me. And so here's a few things that I did to help lower the temperature on my anxiousness during my student pilot journey. Number 1, pre-flight. Believe it or not, pre-flight is a great place to really lean into thinking about reducing your anxiety. What do I mean by that? Okay, so the most important thing that you want to do during a pre-flight is to make sure that the airplane is in good working order. If you know in your mind that you've done a thorough pre-flight and the airplane is completely airworthy, then that's something that can reduce your stress or your anxiety as it relates to, is anything going to happen when I get in the air? Now, pre-flight is no guarantee that something can't go wrong. The stuff that you will at least anticipate go wrong, you will know that it won't because you've checked it thoroughly. But here's the other thing about pre-flight, and I'm going to show you what I mean that can really reduce your anxiety. One of the things I love to do when I'm pre-flighting Charlie is really just have a very specific routine in terms of how I go about pre-flighting her. And so one of the things that's great about doing a thorough pre-flight is just the act of going through all of the different parts of pre-flighting can really start to reset your brain from, oh my gosh, okay, it's a little windy. It's like, no, just dial in. So here's where I start. I start right here at the baggage door. The one thing that I always make sure is once I unplug the battery tender, I put the key in this lock, I close the baggage door, and I know for a fact that that baggage door is locked. And so out of all the other things that can happen, one of the things I know that will not happen is this baggage door is not going to come open. Now you may think, oh man, that's so simple and sophomoric, but think about it. That's one less thing that is going to be on my brain. And just the act of checking that box is like, okay, not going to worry about the baggage door. Then I don't have my flaps down now, but the next thing I do, as soon as I come from here, I go right to here. And right here is my flap arm linkage. And again, my flaps are up, so unfortunately you can't see. But I go right from number 1 to right to number 2. What does my flap linkage look like? And again, simple and sophomoric, right? The linkage basically connects to the mechanism in the airplane. So I know that at least on this side, right now, that linkage looks great. It is operating appropriately, and that gives me another woosah, part of my checklist. No, but seriously, just that act. I don't have to worry about the baggage door. I don't have to worry about the flap arm on the right side of the airplane. It is great, and the flap looks great. That gives me some comfort. The next thing that I do is I come over to the aileron. And I want to make sure that the aileron is moving nicely. Now, I've got my headgear in there, so, it's on the yoke. But that's another thing that I do. And I just make sure that I see all these rivets and screws or what they need to be, and I'm checking all of this. And just the act of doing all of this basically just makes my brain feel like there's some comfort. I have some level of control over what is about to happen. And that's the thing about, when I felt anxious, not understanding what was happening with the control surfaces or going over the wing and looking at the rivets. It gives me this calming sense of, this is what's familiar. This is what I do. This is how I make myself safe. And so even things like, looking at the lights, I come around here, I look at the fuel caps, and I have this mantra. If my fuel caps are lined up with the wind, my fuel caps are gonna be good. If they are turned or any way out of the wind, that is a fuel cap that is probably gonna come off and I'm gonna lose fuel, right? So I always make sure I touch my fuel caps. Again, another thing that I don't have to worry about. I don't have to worry about losing fuel from my tip tank. And as I come down here, I check this as well. It's lined up in the wind and it's good. Now, I don't want it to be like this because again, that's a fuel cap that's coming off. I turn it, make sure it's lined up and it's good. And again, all this surface here in terms of, the front of the wing, the cord of the wing, all of the screws, the lights, all of that kind of stuff. Now, again, I'm not going to go through all of the pre-flight, but you get my idea. This exercise brings a sense of normalcy and routine. And pre-flighting not only helps you with making sure all the things of the airplane are airworthy, but it's the routine of the thing. That's why you should never rush your pre-flight. Go through it methodically, because not only are you trying to make sure that the plane is in good working order, but you're also trying to put yourself in a good mindset, like, I've done what I needed to do, everything possible to make this a safe flight. So as I always do, I check these butterfly screws to make sure that the cowling is where it needs to be. Of course, I dig in here to make sure that the belt is in good shape. I then go over the prop, the spinner. I'm always on the spinner. I'm always pulling on stuff. And so I never have to worry about, oh my gosh, is the cover gonna come off? Did I close the oil door? Click. If I don't hear that, it's not, I'm coming back to it. And then again, on these, same thing over here, with the exception of making sure I go down, remove that before flight, all of that kind of stuff, removing the wheel chocks, all that good stuff. And so as a student pilot, take your time, do a thorough pre-flight. I know that your CFI is going to show you how to do it. And they're going to do it, with you using a checklist. Do that and make sure you go through it methodically. And again, the point is definitely to make sure that the plane is airworthy. But I want you to think about it in terms of putting yourself in a mindset where you feel safe. You're doing what you need to do to make yourself safe, but you're also doing what you need to do to make people who are flying with you safe, but you're also doing something to make people on the ground safe as well. That'll give you this sense of empowerment. That should reduce your anxiety just a touch, because it'll give you some sense of control. Listen, I will freely admit that before I really understood what I was looking for, I asked a lot of questions, but I will say that every time I felt a little bit of anxiety about, it's windy out and am I going to be able to control the airplane, and I got a little anxious, just the act of, okay, well, I can't control the wind and I can't control everything that the airplane is going to do in response to the wind, but I can control whether or not I know that I've done everything I could to make sure that the plane is in good working order. And that exercise reduced some of the anxiety that I was feeling. So that's the first thing I'd say, pre-flight. Don't skip over that and don't poo-poo it. People always just talk about pre-flight and they hang up. That exercise is a very, very important key to your flying experience every time. I actually use pre-flight now to kind of get me in that mindset, especially if I'm about to take a lesson, because as you know, I am an aviation YouTuber, and some part of my mind is occupied with doing an intro for the flight, and then on the back end, an outro. I do the intro first and foremost because I want to get that out of the way so that then it's all about aviation. It's not about YouTube or GoPros or any of that kind of stuff. It's just about flying. Pre-flight is that transition from normal life of driving and drinking water and eating food and sitting at a traffic light to piloting. That's that transition period that I go from just being normal Russ, walking around, looking at stuff, talking to other human beings, to being a pilot. That's where I make that transition. That's why I believe pre-flight should play such a large role in the beginning of each of your flights as a student pilot and beyond, and it has the real potential to reduce your anxiety. Number 2, and this is going to sound simple and sophomoric as well, but it is really key. Let's get in the airplane and I'll tell you what number 2 is that can help you reduce your anxiety. Okay, so number 2 is, and it's weird being inside Charlie and not going somewhere. Like anytime I get in the cockpit, I'm like, it's time to fly, it's time to fly, it's time to fly. But yeah, actually it's not time to fly. But like I said, it is weird being in the cockpit knowing I'm not going anywhere. And yeah, I do want to fly, but the winds are like really crazy. But anyway, I digress. But number 2, one of the things that can reduce your anxiety, going over your checklist. So again, one of the things that you want to do anytime you're getting ready to fly is you want to do those things that feel routine, natural, and normal. Pre-flight is definitely one of those things that can take you to transition you from just being out in the world to now being in the pilot seat. Now that you've done your pre-flight, your checklists are the things that you do to know that you're doing your procedures routinely. And so even after you've done your pre-flight, or one of the things that I do after I do my pre-flight, I actually come back a lot of times and I will do, some other things that are on this checklist. So my checklist works like the first thing you do is you check out your papers and stuff. I actually go back to that when I come in the cockpit. The exterior is where I start on my checklist. And I don't know if this is going to come up in the thing or whatever, but here mine says initial, and my initial is, I won't look at the papers, but I will do a lot of the things in terms of turning the master on and, looking at the lights and stuff like that. But a lot of times I will make sure that I'm really focusing on this exterior part where it talks about the fuel, visually checking it, the fuel tanks, sumping them, caps, drains, and vents. So as you can see, each part of the checklist puts you in a frame of mind to know where you are in terms of airworthiness of the aircraft, making sure everything is working. And so the thing that I love about the checklist is that it is so routine. And you can also then put it in your mind, just like when you're doing your pre-flight. If you've gone methodically through your checklist, you've done everything humanly possible to make sure that this flight can be as safe as possible. You're making sure that the plane is airworthy, and you're making sure that you're airworthy because you have stuck very specifically to all your procedures. One of the things that I always love about my checklist and going through is run up and pre-takeoff. I don't see any anomalies, right? I make sure that my fuel is on the proper tank. I make sure that the flight controls are correct. So I'm looking out the window, turning into the left. I'm looking for that right aileron to come up, looking for the right one to be down. Left and right, right? And then I turn it to the right. I'm looking for that right aileron to come up and that left one to go down. So I'm looking for that opposite. I have that. I know I've got good aileron control. I love that. I'm looking at all my instruments, oil temp, oil pressure, fuel pressure, looking at my, even the fuel levels, looking at my heading indicator, all of the electronics. Do I see any big red X's or anything like that? I then go down to my primer, making sure my primer is in and locked. Right and left mags, making sure that they are operational. Looking at my oil pressure, my oil temp, my fuel flow, my amps, all of that kind of stuff. I feel good about the all of the operation of the equipment, operation of my control surfaces. By the time I get through my pre-takeoff, flaps as required, mixture full rich, fuel pump on, carb heat off, pitot heat as required, doors, windows locked, transponder is where it needs to be, lights as required, turn on my taxi landed light, and making sure that I don't have a max crosswind of 17 knots. Once I've gone through those components, I go to my takeoff, and I feel beyond confident that this is going to be a safe takeoff and therefore a safe flight. Right now, of course, there's other things that need to happen during the flight in terms of climbing, making sure that I'm doing that climb checklist, turning off the fuel pump and all that kind of thing. But just the act of going through the checklist and knowing that everything is operating normally, that gives me this sense of control and peace to know that, yeah, more likely than not, this flight is going to be normal and I'm going to be safe and everything is going to be okay. Now, it could be that on my takeoff roll, the engine is going to quit. Well, I've done that. I've done all the briefings in terms of what happens if, I don't make best power. What happens if I rotate and there's runway left and I'm at a certain height? What happens if I'm at a certain height and there's no runway left? I have gone through all of that out loud as part of the checklist and the flight briefing and the passenger briefing if I have one, so that there are no surprises. So I'm ready to anticipate those types of things happening. Since I know that I've really focused on those issues and I have not just phoned it in, and I've been very fastidious about going through this checklist, that is a way that I reduce my anxiety about the what ifs. I am prepared for the what ifs as much as I can be. And even if there's something that pops up that I may not have anticipated, I don't know, the engine just quits. Well, I've talked about that. Or, my yoke locks up or a cable snaps. Well, because I've gone through the checklist I've given myself the best opportunity I can to have a good result and not just go through a complete startle, but you know, I'm gonna figure it out. And the routine nature of going through the checklist and doing the pre-flight, I'm prepared for those types of things. You can't prepare for everything, but this is a way to at least reduce your anxiety, because you know, again, it's all about doing just as much as you possibly can to make sure that the airplane is in the best working condition that you can make the observations to ascertain, and that you are ready to make a safe flight. So those first two things, doing a very good methodical pre-flight and making sure that you're always on top of your checklist usage, those are two things that you can really do to reduce your anxiety as a student pilot and beyond. Okay, so you've done your pre-flight is the first thing to reduce your anxiety. And the second thing is you're really focusing on your checklist items, making sure you're doing everything with particularity, not rushing through anything, and not just saying it and not really checking or touching the thing that you're saying that you're checking on the checklist. And so now you're at the third thing. The third thing you can do to reduce your anxiety is the stuff that you do while you're down here. We call it ground school. Now, ground school gets short shrift all the time because it's boring, it's not exciting, sometimes it's difficult, it's hard to focus, right? I mean, it's not flying. Flying is fun. Flying is exciting. Flying is what makes this whole thing, that's the magic of all of this. But ground school is the foundation upon which you build your piloting house. What do I mean by that? See, there's some people who try to rush through the ground school stuff. Yeah, I know. You'll hear those people all the time. But sometimes they really don't know, or they really don't understand a factor. And so when you don't understand something and you then try to act on it, but you really don't know, you can run into trouble. Here's an example. Let's say that, you know, I was told to study by my CFI left turning tendencies, and what are the causes of that, or why can that happen? And I just know, yeah, the plane is gonna turn left and I have to put some right rudder, but I never really thought about it. And let's say, for instance, there's just a little bit more of a crosswind, right? Which can kind of change the nature of what we're talking about in terms of these left turning tendencies. And I really don't understand. So now I'm in an airplane. I've gone from maybe a 152. I'm now in a 172, a 182, or, you know, a 181 as opposed to a 140 in a Piper. And I've smashed that throttle. And next thing you know, I'm fine on the ground, but as soon as I rotate, off to the left. And a lot of times I've seen that when I've watched people take off. When I see that kind of a takeoff, that's a person I realize that really doesn't understand what left turning tendencies are all about, in terms of not only when you're on the ground, but once you rotate and all that kind of stuff, and just how much right rudder input is necessary. And so that's one of those things where if you do your homework, you'll understand how this all works. Why you're supposed to, you know, check your ailerons, why you're supposed to sump your fuel, and what you're looking for in terms of, okay, I'm looking for blue, but what if there is water in the fuel? What does that look like? Have you studied that? All of those types of things go hand in hand with understanding what you're supposed to sing, what the philosophy is behind it, and why it works the way it does. If you put in the work here on the ground, your understanding will be that much crisper, so that when you do get in the airplane, there won't be any surprises to you. You will have read and understood and figured out all the things that need to happen before you get in the airplane. I tell you, you do that, that takes the mystery out of it, which is something that can be anxiety producing, and demystify that piece of knowledge, therefore reducing the anxiety of it. One of the things that used to worry me when I was flying was this whole thing regarding, okay, stalling the aircraft, right? Specifically, power on stalls. I hated it. And the thing that I didn't like was, especially in a Cessna high wing, a 172, when we would do a power on stall, you hit that throttle, right? And you're pitching up, and that thing starts screeching. And for whatever reason, it always seemed like that thing would come up, that stall horn starts screaming, it would break, and that right wing always seems like it wanted to dip. And I gotta tell you, man, that always freaked me out. I hated power on stalls. But the reason why I hated power on stalls, and the reason why I hated doing them, was because I didn't understand a few things that were happening that, had I been really dialing in my ground school, I wouldn't have been as worried. The first thing that I didn't really understand was, look, the power on stall is to basically make sure that, you basically lower that nose. That's the exercise. But the other thing that I hadn't read or understood was, it felt like I was going to get into a spin, but I didn't understand spins. I hadn't done anything to even think about what's a spin, what causes a spin, how do you get into a spin, how do you get out of a spin. And so one of the things that I did when I went to my flight instructor, I said, listen, I am really concerned that when we do a power on stall, this thing is going to spin. And the one thing that my CFI said to me that I'll never forget, that's why I know this will work if you do your good ground school. He said to me, look, we're going to talk all about spins. We're going to do all of that before we even get in the airplane. And so the first thing we talked about was the flight characteristics of a Cessna 172 wing, period. Its tendency to spin or not spin, how to get it into a spin, how to aggravate the aircraft such that it gets into a spin, right? Now, we did not get into airplane and do spin training because the airplane was not qualified for that. He was not qualified to teach it, and I wasn't trying to do spin training because brother was freaked out anyway, just thinking about the spins, so didn't want to do it. But the idea of understanding that airfoil, its characteristics, its tendency to want to level out, right? To not spin, unless you did following things that allowed it to get into an aggravated stall, which then caused the spin. See, I hadn't been studying any of that. And the fact that as we were going up and I heard the stall horn, and the fact that that right wing tipped a little bit, to me was an indication that we were about to get into a spin because I didn't understand how spins work. And so once I really focused on the ground school portion of spins, how do they happen? What makes them happen? Cross control, all those kinds of things. And also, which aircraft, what type of wings, what type of conditions are most likely to cause a spin. Once I studied all of that, I realized we were no closer to a spin than me winning the daggone lottery. And so once I understood that aspect on the ground, once we got into the air, I did that power on stall, and I didn't even think about it. The idea of spinning was not even an issue because I knew that I was not putting the type of inputs. We did not have the type of situations. There was not the type of circumstances that would induce a spin in the airplane. So because of that, it reduced the anxiety and I didn't even think about it. The other thing that we did on the ground though is we talked about, okay, heaven forbid we do get into a spin. What do we do? And that's when I learned about, the acronym, I think is PAIR or PARI, P, power to idle, A, ailerons neutral, R, opposite rudder, and E, ailerons neutral, and then you look to come out and you recover and all that kind of stuff. And we talked about that. And again, we didn't do any spin training, because there was no qualifications, we didn't have the right kind of aircraft. And actually, spin training is actually going to be something that I do. But at any rate, once I demystified everything about spins and spin recovery, and that spins were really aggravated stalls, and how one gets into an aggravated stall, once I demystified that whole thing, I was no longer anxious about spins, and therefore I was no longer anxious about doing power on stalls. And so, student pilots and even regular pilots, make sure that when your feet are on the ground and you're sitting at a table, that you're really being mindful of what it is that you're trying to do and what you're trying to learn, because the ground school portions can demystify a lot of these components of what you're going to be doing in the airplane, so that when you do get in the airplane, you're not seeing this for the first time. You've read about it, you've studied it, you've analyzed it, and then you've understood it. If you do that, then if you see something, you'll be like, yeah, this is what it said it was going to do. This is what I anticipated was going to happen. Now, here's the thing. If you just phone it in, then you will continue to be anxious, because you will induce additional anxiety, because you will know that you really don't know what you're doing, you really don't understand this, and then you'll see something and you won't know why it's happening, and that's just gonna freak you out. So don't do that. Really focus on your ground school. Understand these concepts, understand these things, and if you don't, you're not able to understand it on your own, definitely work with your flight instructor. He or she will definitely lay it out for you, chapter and verse. And be sure to watch other YouTube videos, use other resources. But the more you can demystify an aspect of flying here on the ground, the less anxious you're going to be in the airplane, I guarantee it. And those are the three things that I think that will really help you reduce your anxiety. Do a very methodical pre-flight and have it be part of your routine, and let nothing or no one or no thing rush you in your pre-flight. This is the time for you to get zen, and that pre-flight transforms you from Joe Schmo on the street to a pilot. Don't rush it. 2, make sure you go over your checklist methodically with care. Don't just read it, do it. If you're looking for fuel pressure, look for the fuel pressure gauge and make sure that it's where it needs to be. Checklists are your friend for every component of flight and every flight. You do that, you will reduce your anxiety, because you know that you have not missed something. And so let's say you're coming in and you're like, can I do this go around? Yeah, you can, but you're probably not gonna be able to do it if the carb heat is still on and your mixture is not full rich, because you missed it on the checklist. Just saying. And lastly, make sure you focus on your ground school. Ground school is not to punish you. It feels like punishment. It really does. And the written exam, gosh, what a rite of passage that kind of sucks, right? But the ground school really can help reduce anxiety, because you really understand what's happening. The more you can understand what's happening down here, the less you have to worry once you get up there. And for me personally, I do a fourth thing, but this is not everybody's, but the fourth thing that I do to reduce my anxiety for every flight is I pray. One of the things that I see about flight and this flight journey, I really believe that the good Lord put this before me, because I didn't grow up around any of this stuff. Nobody in my family's a pilot. I still can't believe that, not only am I a licensed pilot, but I own an airplane, which is just so nuts to me. And so those aspects in and of itself makes me realize that this can't be nothing but the good Lord. And so that's why, for me, it is incumbent upon me to make sure that as part of the 3 things that I do, the 4th thing, I always, make sure that I try to pray. Now, I'm not gonna lie, there's sometimes where, I'm in a lesson and, I don't wanna pray in front of the person or whatever, because I just don't make anybody uncomfortable if they have a different belief system and all that kind of stuff. But I do know that at some point during that day, before I get in this cockpit and I fire up this engine, there's a prayer that's going to happen. And so that's just something that I do. So if you pray, pray, because that will reduce your anxiety as well. If you don't, that's cool, you know, but that's just something that I know is important to me. Okay, so that's it. Pre-flight, must do, can definitely reduce your anxiety. Use your checklist methodically, must do, can definitely reduce your anxiety. Ground school, stay on top of your ground school. Understand how this stuff works while your feet are on the ground will definitely reduce your anxiety, because you've increased your understanding and will anticipate what's about to happen and will understand what's happening. And then for my brothers and sisters out there, you know, that are believers, don't forget to pray. All right, so that's it. Just wanted to do that real quick. And, you know, this came up because, you know, somebody was talking about, you know, being anxious as a student pilot. And I thought, well, I think I can help that, you know, help somebody out on that score. So that's the reason for this video. I thank you for taking the time to watch it. I thank you for your support of this channel. Yes, next week we'll get back into the cockpit and hopefully do some flight training. All right, with that, Russ can fly, I'm out. Peace.